Have you ever felt completely invisible? That feeling when someone looks at you, but they don't actually see you? They see a uniform, a job title, or a status, and in a split second, they write your entire story without reading a single page. It's a painful, frustrating feeling that so many of us have experienced. Now, what if I told you that the quiet power of being underestimated is the greatest secret weapon a person can possess? This isn't just a motivational quote, it's the heart of a true story about pride, downfall, and the most unexpected form of redemption you will ever see. This is the story of Laura Wallace, a woman who had everything and thought it made her a queen, and Jack Fuller, a man who had a secret and it made him a king. Laura lived in a glittering world built on a mountain of debt, looking down on everyone she deemed beneath her. In her favorite restaurant, she once mocked a humble waiter, telling him to his face, "You'll never be more than a servant." She felt powerful saying those words, completely unaware that this very waiter, this man she just humiliated, was secretly in the process of buying every single penny of her family's crippling debt. The story you're about to witness is a powerful emotional roller coaster. It's about what happens when the person you dismiss holds the key to your entire future. We will see a world of arrogance get turned upside down by a quiet act of kindness. It is a narrative filled with overcoming immense obstacles, a surprise that changes everything, and a plot twist so satisfying it will restore your faith in humanity. This is a heartaching story that proves that true power isn't about the money you have, but the character you show when no one is watching. Before we dive into this incredible journey of revenge, redemption, and an unlikely love story, I want to feel the energy of our amazing community here tonight. Please drop a comment below and tell me from which beautiful city or town you are watching this story unfold. I want to imagine the scene with you. And if you believe that everyone deserves a second chance, do me a favor and hit that like button. Be sure to follow the channel so you never miss another story that touches the soul. And please, share this video with one person you know who will be moved by this message. You know, it's funny how a single sentence can hang in the air, thick and heavy like storm clouds gathering on a perfect summer day. "You'll never be more than a servant," she said, the words dripping with a casual, unthinking cruelty. Laura Wallace, a queen in her own mind, had just passed judgment on a man she didn't know at all. She saw a uniform, a tray, a servant to do her bidding, completely oblivious to the man inside it, a man named Jack Fuller. Her comment was meant to be a final cutting remark. The sound of her voice, sharp and mocking, echoed in the opulent dining room, a place built on the illusion of effortless grace. Yet, her words were anything but graceful. They were a crude display of power, a desperate need to feel superior. For a moment, it felt as if every clink of silverware, every hushed conversation, paused to witness this small, ugly moment. To be so publicly mocked was a bitter pill, one that many would find impossible to swallow. It was a clear line drawn in the sand between her world and his. But here is where the story takes a turn, my friend. Jack Fuller didn't flinch. He didn't bow his head in shame or clench his fists in anger. Instead, he simply met her gaze with a calmness that was almost unsettling, a quiet patience that held a universe of secrets. He was a waiter, yes, but that was a role, a costume he wore, not the entirety of his being. He held a powerful secret, one that simmered just beneath the surface, a quiet confidence that her petty insults couldn't possibly touch. What a strange twist of fate, don't you think? To be so thoroughly misjudged by the very person whose destiny you hold in the palm of your hand. She felt powerful in that moment, having humiliated the man she saw as beneath her. Little did she know, her entire glittering world was a house of cards, and the hand that could either steady it or send it scattering belonged to the very servant she had just dismissed so contemptuously. This is a classic setup for a plot twist. This is where we see the first spark of a much larger fire, an emotional current running beneath the surface of their exchange. It's a profound lesson in how we perceive value. We look at a person's station in life, and we write a story about them without reading a single page of their actual book. Jack's quiet dignity in the face of her arrogance was the first clue that this wasn't just a story about status. It was a story about character, about the deep-seated human need for redemption. Laura turned away, a smug little smile playing on her lips, utterly convinced of her victory. She dismissed him from her mind as easily as she would a speck of dust on her designer dress. But as she walked away, Jack Fuller allowed himself a brief, knowing glance in her direction. It wasn't a look of anger or a promise of revenge, not yet. It was something far more potent, the quiet certainty of someone who knows the end of the story before it has even truly begun. Laura Wallace's life was a beautifully curated illusion, wasn't it? A masterpiece painted with borrowed colors. She glided through the world wrapped in designer fabrics and the intoxicating scent of expensive perfume. A picture of effortless wealth. But underneath it all, her entire existence was propped up by a mountain of family debt, a precarious foundation she chose to ignore. It's easier to look down on others when you refuse to look at the truth of your own situation. And oh, how she loved to look down on everyone. Her philosophy was simple: there were people who mattered, and then there were the people who served them. To her, the staff at the restaurant were nothing more than background characters in the movie of her life, faceless uniforms there to fulfill her every whim. She treated each waiter and busboy not as a person, but as a function, a servant whose only purpose was to remain invisible until beckoned. This wasn't just arrogance, it was a deeply ingrained belief that her birthright placed her on a pedestal far above the common folk. She never considered the hands that prepared her food, poured her wine, or cleared her plates. These were ghosts, and she was the queen of a feast they could never dream of attending. This disconnection from reality was her shield, protecting her from the gnawing secret of her family's financial instability. By making others feel small, she could momentarily feel big, powerful, and in control of a life that was in truth spiraling. It was a classic case of someone humiliated by their circumstances, taking it out on others. It's a tale as old as time, really. The more fragile the inside, the harder the outside shell. Laura's cutting remarks and dismissive gestures were not signs of strength, but of a profound weakness. She was terrified of the day the bills would come due, when the grand illusion would shatter into a million pieces. So she built her walls higher and higher, using disdain as the mortar and contempt as the bricks, creating a fortress of solitude from which she could safely look down upon the world. And Jack Fuller, he saw it all. He watched her performance day after day, not with judgment, but with a kind of sad recognition. He knew the language of fear masquerading as pride. Every time she mocked a member of the staff, he saw the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. He recognized the desperate dance of someone trying to outrun a shadow that was growing longer and darker with each passing day, a shadow shaped like an insurmountable debt. She was living on borrowed time and borrowed money, a princess in a castle made of credit cards. It was a beautiful, dazzling, and utterly temporary kingdom. Laura believed her status was her birthright, her permanent reality. She had no idea that the ground beneath her feet was about to give way, and the world she so casually dismissed was about to become the only one she had left. What a surprise that would be! Meanwhile, in the very same room, another reality was unfolding, one of quiet dignity and hidden strength. Jack Fuller moved through the chaos of the restaurant with a practiced, almost silent grace. To the patrons, he was just another waiter, efficient and unobtrusive, part of the seamless machinery that made the establishment so exclusive. He performed his duties with a diligence that bordered on artistry, never once letting the mask of the humble servant slip. It was a performance, in its own way, just as curated as Laura's. He saw everything. From his vantage point, he was more than a waiter, he was an observer of human nature in its rawest form. He saw the secret deals whispered over cocktails, the fragile egos bolstered by expensive meals, and the casual cruelty of people like Laura Wallace. He watched her arrogance, not with resentment, but with a deep, abiding patience. It was the patience of a chess master watching his opponent make all the predictable, self-destructive moves, knowing the checkmate is inevitable. This patience was his shield, his greatest defense. While others might have bristled at being mocked or treated as invisible, Jack absorbed it all with a serene calm. He knew a profound secret that insulated him from such petty slights. This job, this uniform, was a temporary disguise. It was a choice. He was there for a reason, a purpose that was slowly but surely coming to fruition. His real identity was tucked away, safe from the judgment of a world that only saw what was on the surface. Think about the power in that. To willingly place yourself in a position where you are underestimated, to embrace being a ghost in the room. It's a strategy, a way to see the world as it truly is, without the filters of wealth and status. Jack Fuller was gathering information, not just about finances and debt, but about character. He was watching to see who people were when they thought no one of consequence was paying attention. It was a deeply emotional and human experiment. Laura, in her gilded cage, saw him as a fixture, a part of the decor. She never once truly looked at him, never saw the sharp intelligence in his eyes or the subtle confidence in his posture. She couldn't have imagined that this humble waiter was connected to her life in the most intimate and powerful way possible. The irony was poetic. The man she considered less than nothing was, in fact, the silent architect of her future, the keeper of her destiny. And so, he continued to pour her wine, to clear her plates, to endure her condescending tone. He was playing the long game, a game of overcoming perception. Every arrogant glance she threw his way only solidified his resolve. He wasn't plotting a simple revenge. His plan was far more complex, more nuanced. He was waiting for the perfect moment, for the grand plot twist, a moment that was fast approaching. The universe has a funny way of testing us, of creating moments that reveal our true nature. For Laura, that moment came in a flash of heated rivalry. During a particularly nasty argument with another socialite, a war of words fought with venomous smiles, her bracelet, a delicate, sentimental family heirloom, slipped from her wrist unnoticed. It was the only thing she owned that wasn't tied to the family debt. Its value was purely emotional, a link to a happier, simpler time. Its loss was a sharp, unexpected blow. Later that evening, long after the restaurant had emptied and the echoes of laughter had faded, Jack Fuller was doing his final sweep. There, gleaming faintly under the dim light, was the bracelet. He recognized it instantly. He had seen it on her wrist countless times, a small, genuine piece of her amidst all the artifice. He could have left it for the manager, but he felt a pull, a sense of responsibility. This was different. This was about more than just a lost item. It was a piece of her soul, lost in a moment of ugliness. He found her just as she was about to step into her car, her face a mask of frustration from the earlier fight and the frantic, fruitless search. He approached quietly, holding out the delicate chain. "Miss Wallace," he said, his voice even and calm, "I believe this is yours." The surprise on her face was genuine, a flicker of unguarded relief that momentarily softened her harsh features. For a second, she wasn't the queen, just a woman who had recovered something precious. This act of kindness was unexpected, but the moment was fleeting. Her old habits kicked in like a reflex. Reaching into her purse, she pulled out a wad of cash, a condescending smile returning to her lips. "Well, thank you, waiter. Here you go. For your trouble." She offered it as one might offer a treat to a dog. It wasn't a reward, it was a dismissal, an attempt to put him back in his box, to re-establish the hierarchy. She wanted to turn his kindness into a transaction, to make him a servant once more. And here's the plot twist she never saw coming. Jack gently pushed her hand away, his eyes meeting hers without a trace of subservience. "That's not necessary, Miss Wallace. I'm just glad you have it back." He didn't want her money. He didn't want her condescending gratitude. By refusing the reward, he did something no one had done in years. He refused to play her game. He had seen her humiliated and vulnerable, and instead of taking advantage, he showed grace. She was left speechless, the money still clutched in her hand, watching him walk back into the restaurant. The simple act of returning a lost item had become a profound statement. He wasn't a servant she could pay off. He was a man, an equal, who had shown her a moment of pure, unadulterated decency. This small, heart-aching interaction planted a tiny seed of confusion in her mind. A question she couldn't yet articulate: who was Jack Fuller really? It started with a phone call. Not a dramatic explosion, but a quiet, chilling conversation that marked the beginning of the end. The house of cards, so carefully constructed over generations, began to wobble. The creditors who had been patient for so long had finally run out of patience. They were calling in the massive family debt, and the number they quoted was so astronomical it seemed unreal, like something from a movie. But this was very, very real. Suddenly, the world that had once felt so solid and secure became fragile, like thin ice cracking under her feet. The lavish lifestyle, the endless credit, the sense of untouchable privilege was all revealed for what it truly was: a loan. And the payment was now due. Every whispered conversation between her parents was laced with panic. Every rustle of paper sounded like a death sentence. The illusion of wealth was evaporating before her very eyes, and the reality was terrifying. The threats were no longer veiled. They were talking about asset seizure, freezing accounts, and public auctions. The very things that defined her identity: mansion, the luxury cars, the designer wardrobe, are about to be stripped away, piece by painful piece. To be humiliated on such a grand scale was her worst nightmare. This wasn't just about losing money, it was about losing her name, her status, her entire sense of self. It was a complete and total unraveling. It's a different kind of poverty, isn't it? The poverty of someone who has had everything and is about to have nothing. It's a fall from a great height, and the ground is rushing up to meet you with brutal speed. Her friends, who were drawn to the glitter of her life, now seemed distant, their calls less frequent. They could smell the disaster coming, and they wanted no part of it. The overcoming of this challenge seemed utterly impossible. She felt a helplessness she had never known, a deep, gnawing fear that kept her awake at night. The safety net she had always taken for granted was gone. For the first time in her life, Laura Wallace was truly vulnerable, exposed to the harsh realities of a world she had only ever looked down upon. The secret was out, and the shame was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. The life she knew was ending. The parties, the shopping sprees, the casual disregard for cost, it was all a memory now. She was standing on the precipice of a new, terrifying chapter, one where her name meant nothing and her credit meant even less. The kingdom was crumbling, the queen was about to be dethroned, and she had absolutely no idea how to survive in the world outside the castle walls. A world where people like that waiter lived. Panic is a powerful motivator, often pushing us to make desperate, ill-advised decisions. In a moment of pure, unadulterated fear, Laura did something she would have once considered unthinkable. During a tense lunch meeting where she was trying to secure a personal loan from a so-called family friend, she confidently offered to pay, hoping to project an image of stability that she was far from feeling. It was a bluff, a last-ditch effort to keep the illusion alive just a little bit longer. She handed her platinum card to the waiter with her signature dismissive flick of the wrist, a gesture she had performed 1,000 times. But this time was different. The air was thick with tension. The friend was already making excuses, his eyes darting around nervously, clearly unwilling to tie his financial ship to her family's sinking vessel. Laura's entire future felt like it was riding on this one single transaction, this small performance of normalcy. The waiter, not Jack, but another one returned a few minutes later, his expression a mixture of pity and discomfort. He leaned in and whispered, so quietly that only she and her guest could hear, "I'm very sorry, Miss Wallace. The card has been declined." The words, though spoken softly, landed like a cannonball in the silent restaurant. Her guest's eyebrows shot up in a moment of surprise and poorly concealed satisfaction. He had his answer. Her family's ruin wasn't a rumor, it was real. To be humiliated in her own sanctuary, the one place where she had always been treated like royalty, was a new level of hell. Her face burned with a shame so intense it felt like a physical fever. Every eye in the room suddenly felt like it was on her, watching, judging. The whispers she imagined were probably real. She was no longer Laura Wallace, the socialite. She was the woman whose card was declined, the subject of delicious gossip that would spread like wildfire. She had been publicly mocked by her own failing finances. This moment was the first real tangible consequence of the debt. It wasn't a phone call or a letter anymore, it was a public spectacle. The foundation had not just cracked, it had shattered, right there in the middle of her favorite restaurant. Her carefully constructed persona lay in ruins around her feet. She was exposed, vulnerable, and utterly powerless. It was a brutal emotional fall from grace, and there was no one there to catch her. She wanted the ground to swallow her whole. The friend made a hasty excuse and left, leaving her alone at the table with the unpaid bill and the crushing weight of her own disgrace. She was trapped, a queen without a kingdom, a fraud who had finally been exposed. And just when she thought the moment couldn't get any worse, she looked up and saw Jack Fuller watching from across the room, his expression unreadable. Just as Laura was bracing for the final crushing blow of having to admit she couldn't pay, something unexpected happened. She saw Jack Fuller approach the manager, their conversation brief and hushed. The manager then came to her table. His demeanor suddenly changed from professional concern to a placid calm. "It's all right, Miss Wallace," he said smoothly. "Everything has been taken care of." The words hung in the air, a baffling, unbelievable reprieve from her public nightmare. This was an act of profound kindness, a life raft thrown to a drowning woman. Jack had seen her distress, the raw panic in her eyes as she was humiliated, and he had acted. He did it discreetly, without seeking any credit or attention, a simple gesture to spare her from further embarrassment. He didn't do it as a waiter or a servant, he did it as one human being witnessing the suffering of another. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated grace in a situation that had none. But Laura, blinded by her own shame and pride, couldn't see it for what it was. Her mind, racing and defensive, immediately twisted his gesture into something ugly. Pity, that's what it had to be. The humble waiter she had so often mocked was now pitying her. The thought was more galling than the declined card. To be indebted, even for a single meal, to someone she considered so far beneath her was the ultimate insult. It felt like a deliberate act to shame her further. Her interpretation was a defense mechanism, wasn't it? It's easier to be angry than to be grateful, especially when gratitude means acknowledging your own powerlessness. She couldn't accept that this kindness could be genuine. In her world, every action had a hidden motive, a power play. She believed Jack was savoring her downfall, enjoying this little surprise at her expense. This chance to see the mighty Laura Wallace brought low. It was a story that fit her narrative, a story that allowed her to remain the victim of an injustice rather than a recipient of grace. This moment, my friend, is a perfect example of how our own internal state colors our perception of the world. Jack offered a hand, and all Laura could see was a slap in the face. This profound misunderstanding, this misinterpretation of a beautiful act, would become a pivotal turning point in their emotional journey. It was a connection, albeit a fractured and angry one, but a connection nonetheless. It was a precursor to a potential love story, though neither of them could see it yet. And so, instead of relief, A hot, furious anger began to bubble up inside her. She wasn't saved, she was shamed. In her eyes, Jack Fuller had crossed a line, meddling in her affairs and rubbing her nose in her own failure. She looked for him, her eyes scanning the room, not to thank him, but to confront him, to put him back in his place, even as her own place in the world was disappearing. The plot twist of his intentions was completely lost on her. She found him near the service station, calmly polishing silverware as if nothing had happened. The sight of his composure only fueled her rage. She marched up to him, her voice a venomous whisper, "You! How dare you!" She was a cornered animal, lashing out at the first person she could blame for her pain. "You enjoyed that, didn't you? Watching me be humiliated like that? Paying my bill, was that your pathetic little moment of revenge? Your way of mocking me?" Her accusations were a torrent of misplaced anger and wounded pride. She was throwing every ounce of her frustration at him, the one person who had actually tried to help her. In her mind, this simple waiter had orchestrated her public shaming, turning her private crisis into a spectacle for his own amusement. She called him a meddling servant, accusing him of wanting to see her grovel, to be crushed under the weight of a debt, even one as small as a lunch bill. The irony of her words was completely lost on her. But Jack, once again, refused to play her game. He didn't rise to the bait. He simply stopped polishing, placed the fork down gently, and looked her directly in the eye. There was no anger in his gaze, no satisfaction, not even the pity she so dreaded. There was only a profound and unshakable calm. He let her angry words wash over him, understanding that they weren't really about him at all. They were about her fear, her shame, and her desperation. When she finally paused, breathless from her tirade, he spoke. His voice was quiet but carried a weight that silenced her. "I don't enjoy anyone suffering, Miss Wallace," he said simply. "I just believe that everyone, no matter who they are, deserves a little grace when they're having a bad day." It wasn't an apology, nor was it a defense. It was a statement of principle, a philosophy so foreign to her world that it stunned her into silence. It was an act of emotional maturity she couldn't comprehend. Grace, the word hung between them, a concept she had never truly considered. She dealt in transactions, in power, in status. Grace was a currency she didn't understand. His response was a complete surprise, disarming her completely. She had come looking for a fight, for confirmation that he was her enemy, but he had offered her a profound truth instead. It was a heart-aching moment of clarity, a lighthouse beam cutting through the storm of her anger. She stood there, speechless, her accusations dissolving into nothing. He had not only refused to be her villain, but he had also held up a mirror, showing her a better way to be. It was a quiet lesson in overcoming pride, a seed of redemption planted in the most unlikely of moments. She turned and walked away, not in triumph, but in a state of deep and unsettling confusion. His simple act of kindness had become a mystery she couldn't solve, and the man she thought was a simple servant was becoming an enigma. The incident at the restaurant was just the beginning of the great unraveling. Like rats deserting a sinking ship, her friends began to disappear. The calls went unanswered, the invitations stopped coming, and her social calendar, once overflowing, became a barren wasteland. The people she had surrounded herself with were not friends, they were admirers of her lifestyle. And now that the lifestyle was gone, so were they. The isolation was swift, brutal, and absolute. One by one, the pillars of her world were pulled down. A cold, official letter announced that the family accounts were frozen. The credit cards, already useless, were formally canceled. The keys to the sports car were handed over to a grim-faced man from a repossession agency. Each loss was a fresh wave of humiliation, a public stripping away of her identity. The debt was no longer an abstract number, it was an active, malevolent force, dismantling her life piece by piece. She was left to wander the halls of her cavernous, silent mansion like a ghost, the opulence of her surroundings now serving as a cruel mockery of her new reality. The things that once brought her comfort and a sense of superiority were now just reminders of everything she had lost. To be humiliated in private, day after day, was a slow, grinding torture. There was no one to lash out at, no one to blame, but the faceless creditors and the crushing weight of her family's poor decisions. It was in this profound loneliness that the memory of Jack Fuller's words began to echo in her mind. Everyone deserves a little grace. The sentiment, which she had initially dismissed as the ramblings of a simple servant, now took on a different meaning. He had shown her grace when her own friends, her own world, had shown her nothing but contempt. His act of kindness stood in stark contrast to the cold abandonment she was now experiencing. It was a deeply emotional realization. This isolation forced her into a state of introspection she had never experienced before. Stripped of all her external distractions, she was left with nothing but herself, and she didn't much like the person she saw. She recalled all the time she had mocked people, the casual cruelty she had dished out, especially to the staff at the restaurant. For the first time, she began to feel a flicker of empathy, a hint of the pain she must have caused others. This was the first painful step toward redemption. The silence of her life was deafening. There were no more parties to attend, no more rivals to spar with, no more audiences to perform for. It was just her and the crushing reality of her situation. She was alone, truly and completely alone, a queen in exile in her own home. The challenge of overcoming this desolation seemed insurmountable, and she felt herself sinking into a despair so deep, she wasn't sure she would ever find her way out. There's a point where the facade crumbles completely, where holding it all in is no longer an option. For Laura, that point came in the one place that held the most painful memories, the restaurant. Drawn by some strange, self-destructive impulse, she found herself in its quiet back garden, a place she had never noticed before. And there, surrounded by the simple beauty of the flowers, the dam broke. She finally allowed herself to grieve, her body shaking with silent, racking sobs. She was mourning everything: her status, her future, her friendships, the person she thought she was. All the pride and arrogance were washed away in a flood of salty, bitter tears. In that moment, she wasn't Laura Wallace, the socialite. She was just a scared, heartbroken young woman who had lost her way. The weight of the debt, the sting of being humiliated, the loneliness, it all came crashing down on her. It was a raw, emotional, and utterly human moment of surrender. And then, a quiet presence. It was Jack Fuller. He was on his break, and he approached her not with a waiter's deference, but with the gentle concern of a friend. He didn't say a word at first. He simply sat on the bench a respectful distance away, giving her space to breathe. A few minutes later, he returned with 2 steaming cups of tea, placing one beside her. It was a simple, heart-aching gesture of kindness, an offering of warmth in her cold, lonely world. "It's just tea," he said softly, his voice devoid of any judgment or pity. "But sometimes it helps." He spoke to her not as Miss Wallace, the demanding patron, but as Laura. He didn't see a fallen queen, he saw a person in pain. For the first time, someone was looking at her, not at her name or her bank account. He was treating her as an equal, a concept so foreign and so desperately needed that it took her breath away. This simple act of communion, sharing a quiet moment over a cup of tea, was more profound than any grand gesture she had ever known. It was a moment of genuine connection, a fragile bridge being built between 2 vastly different worlds. She found herself talking, the words tumbling out, not excuses or justifications, but the raw, honest truth of her fear and despair. And he listened, truly listened, without trying to fix her or offer platitudes. The potential for a real love story was born in that garden. He wasn't acting as a servant or an employee, he was being a man. A kind man. In her lowest moment, when she had been abandoned by everyone, A surprise ally appeared in the form of the person she had least expected. This was the beginning of her true journey of overcoming, not just her financial ruin, but the poverty of her own spirit. The path to redemption had started with a simple cup of tea. As they sat there in the quiet garden, the steam from their cups swirling in the cool evening air, something shifted. For the first time, Laura wasn't talking down to a waiter, she was talking to a person. And as she talked, and he listened, and then began to talk himself, she discovered a world inside him she never knew existed. He spoke about books, about philosophy, about his dreams, revealing a sharp intelligence and a depth of character that completely shattered her preconceived notions. She had always seen the uniform, the deferential nod, the servant. She had never bothered to look at the man. Now she was seeing him, and what she saw was astonishing. Jack Fuller was not the simple one-dimensional character she had written him off as. He was articulate, witty, and possessed a quiet wisdom that was both humbling and incredibly attractive. The surprise of it all left her reeling, questioning every judgment she had ever made. He didn't talk about her debt or her family's downfall. Instead, he spoke about the nature of overcoming hardship, not as a theoretical concept, but as someone who had lived it. He shared stories, not of wealth, but of value, of finding richness in relationships and experiences rather than possessions. It was a perspective so fundamentally different from her own, yet it resonated deep within her soul, in a place that had long been dormant. It was a truly emotional exchange. She found herself captivated, hanging on his every word. The man she had mocked was now mentoring her, gently guiding her toward a new way of thinking without ever being preachy or condescending. It was the most honest and meaningful conversation she had ever had in her life. This wasn't just a chat, it was a connection, a meeting of minds that transcended their supposed stations. The seeds of a love story were beginning to sprout in the ruins of her old life. In that hour, he revealed a part of his secret life, and not his identity, but his character. He showed her who he was, not what he did for a living. And in doing so, he gave her a priceless gift, the realization that a person's worth is not determined by their job title or their bank balance. It was a lesson in humility, delivered with such kindness and grace that it didn't feel like a lesson at all. It felt like a revelation. As his break ended and he had to return to his duties, Laura felt a pang of disappointment. She didn't want the conversation to end. The man she had once seen as nothing more than a servant had, in the span of an hour, become the most interesting and compelling person she had ever met. A plot twist was unfolding in her own heart, and she was left to wonder what other secrets Jack Fuller might be hiding. Just as a sliver of hope began to pierce through the darkness of her despair, the final blow landed. A thick, official-looking envelope arrived, containing a letter that made her blood run cold. It was a formal notice stating that her family's entire debt portfolio, every last penny of it, had been sold. It was no longer owned by a consortium of banks, but by a single mysterious private investor. The name of the investor was not disclosed. The anonymity of it all was terrifying. A faceless, nameless entity now held complete control over her family's fate. This was no longer a faceless corporation, it was personal. Who would buy such a massive, toxic debt? The only logical answer was someone who wanted to profit from their ruin, someone who would strip their assets with ruthless efficiency, leaving them with absolutely nothing. This was not a reprieve, it was a death sentence. Her mind raced, imagining the worst. Perhaps it was a business rival, someone her father had crossed years ago, now back for a cruel and calculated revenge. The secret identity of the buyer fueled her paranoia, turning every shadow into a potential enemy. She felt like a pawn in a game she didn't understand, her life's trajectory now in the hands of an unknown puppet master. The fear of being utterly and finally humiliated was overwhelming. This news plunged her back into the depths of despair, erasing the small progress she had made. The conversation with Jack, The glimmer of hope it all seemed like a naive dream in the face of this harsh new reality. What good was a change of heart if she was about to be homeless? The challenge of overcoming seemed impossible now. She was completely at the mercy of this secret investor. It was the ultimate powerlessness. This was the ultimate plot twist in her financial saga, and it felt like a cruel joke. Just when she thought things couldn't possibly get any worse, the universe found a way to raise the stakes. The new owner could call in the dead immediately, forcing them out of their home, selling off every last sentimental possession for pennies on the dollar. It was the specter of total, irreversible ruin, and it was now closer than ever. She clutched the letter, the crisp paper crinkling in her trembling hand. There was no one to turn to, no one to ask for help. Her family was broken, her friends were gone, and she was facing a powerful, unknown adversary. The faint hope of redemption she had felt in the garden felt a million miles away. All she could feel was the icy grip of fear, a fear for a future that now seemed to hold nothing but darkness. There's a moment when you hit the bottom so hard that the only way to look is up. For Laura, that moment came when she saw a help-wanted sign in the window of the restaurant. Her first instinct was to laugh, a bitter, hollow sound. The irony was almost too much to bear. Her, Laura Wallace, applying for a job as a trainee, a lowly servant, in the very place where she had once reigned as a queen. It was unthinkable. And yet, it was her only option. Swallowing what was left of her pretty, jagged, painful pill, she walked inside. The act of asking for an application form was one of the hardest things she had ever done. It was a complete surrender, an admission of her own defeat. She was no longer above anyone. She was a person who needed a job, any job, to survive. This was the ultimate humbling, a necessary step in her journey of overcoming her past self. The manager looked at her with a mixture of pity and disbelief. He remembered her, of course. He remembered her arrogance, her demands, the scene with the declined credit card. To him, she was the last person on earth he would consider hiring. Her application seemed like a bad joke, a surprise he didn't welcome. He could see the potential for disaster written all over it. Hiring her felt like inviting chaos into his well-ordered establishment. But Laura was different now. The desperation in her eyes was real. There was no trace of the haughty socialite left, only a young woman on the brink, willing to do anything for a chance, a lifeline. She spoke to him with a humility she had never possessed before, explaining that she was a hard worker and was willing to learn from the ground up. It was a far cry from the woman who once mocked his staff without a second thought. This was her first real attempt at redemption. Still, the manager was skeptical. Her presence could be disruptive for the staff she had previously mistreated, especially Jack Fuller, who had witnessed the worst of her behavior. It was a risk, a big one. He pictured her trying to take orders, being humiliated by former rivals who would surely delight in her downfall. The restaurant's reputation was on the line. He was ready to say no, to give her a polite but firm rejection. Laura saw the refusal forming on his lips. Her heart sank. This was her last hope, her only chance to build something new from the ashes of her old life. She had hit rock bottom, and it felt like the bottom was about to give way, plunging her into an even deeper abyss. She braced herself for the final rejection, the one that would signify that there was truly no place for her in this world anymore. Just as the manager opened his mouth to deliver the final, crushing no, a calm voice cut through the tension. "I think you should hire her." Both Laura and the manager turned in surprise. It was Jack Fuller, standing there with a tray of clean glasses, his expression serious and thoughtful. He had overheard the entire exchange, and now he was stepping in, risking his own credibility to intervene on her behalf. It was a completely unexpected plot twist. The manager was taken aback. "Jack, are you serious?" he asked, his voice low. "After the way she treated you, all of us? She mocked you. She treated you like a servant beneath her notice. He couldn't understand Jack's motivation. It seemed illogical, almost crazy, to defend the person who had been his primary tormentor. He expected Jack, of all people, to be celebrating her downfall, not advocating for her employment. But Jack simply shook his head, his gaze shifting to Laura for a brief, meaningful moment. "People can change," he said to the manager, his voice filled with a quiet conviction. "If spoken with her, I see something different now. I believe she's ready to work, to learn. Everyone deserves a second chance, a shot at redemption." His words were a powerful testament to his character, an act of kindness so profound it left Laura breathless. This was the moment that could change everything. Jack's opinion held weight in the restaurant. He was respected by everyone, not just as a diligent waiter, but as a man of integrity. By vouching for Laura, he was putting his own reputation on the line. He was betting on her potential, investing his trust in the flicker of change he had seen in the garden. It was a deeply emotional and selfless gesture, a true sign of a burgeoning love story. The manager looked from Jack's earnest face to Laura's hopeful, tear-filled eyes. He was still hesitant, but Jack's endorsement had swayed him. If Jack Fuller, the very person who had the most reason to want her gone, believed she deserved a chance, then who was he to argue? It went against his better judgment, but he decided to trust Jack's intuition. It was a gamble, but one he was now willing to take. "All right," the manager sighed, turning back to Laura. "Against my better judgment, you can start tomorrow. Trainee, you'll be washing dishes and shadowing the other staff. One mistake, one hint of your old attitude, and you're out." "Understood?" Laura could only nod, a wave of gratitude so overwhelming that she couldn't speak. She had been given a lifeline, thrown to her by the last person on earth she ever expected it from. Her journey of overcoming had truly begun. Laura's first day was a brutal collision with reality. Dressed in a plain, ill-fitting uniform, she was assigned to the scullery, a world of steam, clattering dishes, and the smell of leftover food. Her hands, once soft and manicured, were plunged into greasy water. The work was grueling, repetitive, and utterly humbling. Every muscle in her body ached. This was the unglamorous backstage of the world she had once commanded, and it was a harsh, unforgiving place. She struggled immensely. She broke a glass, stacked the plates wrong, and moved with a clumsy uncertainty that earned her more than a few annoyed sighs from the seasoned kitchen staff. She, who had never worked a day in her life, was completely out of her element. It was a painful, humiliating experience, a constant reminder of how far she had fallen. She felt like a clumsy child, and the temptation to give up, to run away, was almost overwhelming. But every time she felt her resolve crumble, Jack was there. He wasn't her supervisor, but he made it his mission to mentor her. During his breaks, he would patiently show her the proper way to carry 3 plates, the secret to polishing silverware without leaving streaks, the rhythm of the kitchen. He never mocked her mistakes or showed a hint of impatience. His guidance was a quiet, steady presence in the chaos of her first day. He taught her more than just the tasks of a waiter or a servant. He taught her about the ecosystem of the restaurant, about the respect each person, from the dishwasher to the head chef, deserved. He explained that they were a team and every role was vital. Through his kindness and patience, he was teaching her the value of hard work and the dignity in a job well done. It was a masterclass in humility, delivered by the person she had once so casually dismissed. It was a slow, arduous process of overcoming her own ingrained entitlement. There were moments of frustration where her old self wanted to lash out, but the memory of Jack's faith in her, and the crushing reality of her debt, kept her grounded. She was learning to be part of something larger than herself, to earn her place through effort rather than birthright. It was a painful but necessary path to her redemption. Slowly, tentatively, a new dynamic formed between them. He was the mentor, and she was the eager, if clumsy, student. A bond forged in shared work and mutual respect began to grow, deeper and more real than any of her previous superficial friendships. This shared struggle, this heart-aching journey, was transforming her, and the foundation of a real love story was being laid, one polished glass and stacked plate at a time. The ultimate test came a few weeks later. Her cruelest rival, the same woman from the argument where she lost her bracelet, walked into the restaurant. Her eyes widened with malicious glee when she saw Laura, dressed in a servant's uniform, clearing a table. Well, the rival sneered, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Look how the mighty have fallen. I always knew you were nothing more than a fraud, living on debt. Now you're right where you belong. The public humiliation was excruciating. Laura froze, every fiber of her being wanting to either run or lash out. She felt the hot sting of tears welling in her eyes as the rival continued to mock her, enjoying the spectacle. But just as she was about to break, Jack Fuller stepped forward, placing a calm, steadying hand on her shoulder. He wasn't wearing his waiter uniform. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, radiating an aura of quiet, confident authority that silenced the entire room. The surprise was palpable. He looked directly at the rival, his voice calm but laced with steel. "That's enough," he said. He then turned to the manager. "Please inform this guest that her reservation has been canceled. In fact, she's no longer welcome in my restaurant." The rival's jaw dropped. "Your restaurant?" She stammered in disbelief. "What are you talking about? You're a waiter." Jack smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "I am the new owner," he stated simply. This was the ultimate plot twist. But he wasn't finished. He turned his gaze to Laura, his eyes softening with kindness. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice now gentle enough for only her to hear, though the whole room was listening. "A few weeks ago, a mysterious investor bought your family's entire debt portfolio. That was me." He revealed his final greatest secret. "I saw you that day in the garden. I saw your heart. I invested in your character, Laura, not your status. I invested in your redemption. As the owner of that debt," he continued, his voice resonating with an emotional weight, "I have the authority to do with it as I please. And I consider it paid in full. Your journey of overcoming is complete." He wasn't seeking revenge on her for her past behavior. This was the opposite. It was an act of radical grace, a heart-aching testament to his belief in her. It was the foundation of their love story, built on forgiveness and a second chance. Laura could only stare at him, tears of shock and gratitude streaming down her face. The humble waiter, the man she had humiliated and mocked, was not only her savior but the secret architect of her entire transformation. He had held the power to destroy her all along, but instead, he chose to rebuild her. He hadn't just bought her debt, he had invested in her future, a future she now saw was intertwined with his. The surprise wasn't just that he was rich, it was that his heart was richer still. And so, we come to the end of this incredible story. What a powerful journey it has been, from the peak of arrogance to the valley of despair, and finally, to the summit of a beautiful and unexpected redemption. It's a profound reminder, isn't it? That the greatest plot twist in life is often the one that happens within our own hearts. The story of Jack and Laura shows us that true wealth is not what you own, but what you are willing to give, and that the greatest strength is found in kindness. We saw Laura, a woman who was humiliated by circumstance, learn that true dignity comes not from status, but from hard work and respect. And we saw Jack, a man who was once dismissed as a mere servant, reveal that his true power was never in his hidden wealth, but in his unwavering belief in the goodness of others. His form of revenge was not to destroy, but to rebuild. It's a heart-aching lesson in overcoming our own prejudices and seeing the potential that lies within everyone. This truly was a love story, but not just a romantic one. It was a story about learning to love yourself enough to change, and loving others enough to give them the chance to do so. Did you expect that final, shocking reveal? The surprise that the humble waiter was the secret architect of her second chance all along? It's a testament to the idea that the people we underestimate often have the most to teach us. Now I would love to hear from you. What part of this emotional story impacted you the most? Was it the moment of kindness in the garden, or the final stunning reveal of Jack's identity? Let me know in the comments below. Did you see the ending coming, or did you expect a different outcome? Your thoughts make this community what it is. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to give this video a like, as it truly helps us reach more people. And if you haven't already, please follow the channel so you don't miss out on our upcoming videos. We have a library full of older stories just like this one for you to explore. Thank you for being here with us today. Until next time, remember that a little grace can change everything.